Morning, folks. Hope you're all well and enjoying the summer, the heat waves notwithstanding. Anyway, so I thought today, I've talked a little bit in the past about subsets of ensembles and how keeping in mind all of the possible subsets of, say, like a trio or a quartet, is useful information to have when considering writing music, or for that matter, arranging music by others. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, I would go back and there's a video of mine called, I think it's like Subsets of Ensembles. And go take a look at that, and you'll know. And what it does, what that particular, well, there's a kind of formal consideration is that, say, for example, in a piece, it makes sure that you keep alternating ensembles in an interesting way, or it helps you think about things like that. And I thought this morning I'd talk a little bit about something else that I found to be quite useful, and it's also a way for me to give a brief acknowledgement to another one of my composition professors, a man named Thomas Fredrickson, who I met at the University of Illinois and was particularly helpful in getting me successfully transitioned from a musicology student to a student of composition theory. And specifically, is a memory of something. And I want to tell you a little bit about this and describe what it does for me. Okay, early on in my lessons with Professor Fredrickson, affectionately known as Tom, to a bunch of people, he offered me the due, and so from here on I'll start referring to him as Tom, occasionally Professor Fredrickson. But one of the things he suggested, he said, was, now look, Bowlby, I don't mean to turn this into a course on English literature or American literature, but I would very strongly recommend, if you don't know this particular bit of writing by Edgar Allan Poe, that you go and take a look at it. And this is my copy of one of the copies of Edgar Allan Poe that I've kept throughout the years, and he referred me to Poe's essay titled "The Philosophy of Composition," which I read and really enjoyed and got a lot out of. And I want to talk a little bit about that to you today. The philosophy of composition is essentially Poe's relating how he wrote, or perhaps constructed is a better word, how he constructed The Raven. And it's really rather fascinating to read this particular essay, because he describes in very, very, very interesting detail it's I don't want to say mathematical, but it kind of is, but numerical kind of is too. But there's a wonderful procedure that I found worth knowing and worth adapting to my own purposes. And one of the things in the philosophy of composition that I found, I think, particularly useful is the idea of, let's see if I can't find this, he talks about the idea of a denouement. Nothing is more clear than every plot worthy of the name must be elaborated to its denouement before anything can be attempted with the pen. And what denouement is a French word for, can be translated as a conclusion. So having a clear conception of how a piece of writing, be it literary or be it musical, having that firmly in mind at the end, working towards a conclusion. I find that to be very, 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 very interesting. To have an end point in mind. Because other people have told me this, and I've experienced it myself. Probably one of the hardest things to do in composing musical composition is actually not beginning, but it's actually continuing and concluding pieces of music that are especially challenging. It's fairly easy to come up off the cuff with interesting musical material, but the question of, well, what are you going to do with it, and how are you going to end it, are worth thinking about right from the very get-go. And after that, through a series of very logical steps, Poe describes how he eventually came up with the basic pattern, basic form, the recurring refrains of Nevermore, etc., and the rhyme schemes. And essentially, in a way, it's like fills in this, and then starts writing. So, and I find that to be very, very, very interesting. At one point, he says, I conceived of a poetic length of 100 lines early on in the process, and eventually, what happened was the actual poem is actually 108 lines. So that's pretty close. So, and I find this very, 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 I think this is a very good thing for composers to think about. I would suggest number one, if you don't know the philosophy of composition, and if you don't know the Raven, here's a really good composition lesson for you. Go and read the Raven. If you don't know it already, and even if you do know it already, read it again. This is a great poem. Then go and read the philosophy of composition. Learn about denouement, the conclusion, the overall span. What's going to happen in that span? How is it going to do that? And how will it proceed? And then after that, I would suggest going back and reading the Raven again a couple of times. And I think that this will provide you with, I think, a kind of mental concept of first thinking to yourself, okay, I got me a space, sort of feels, I got a piece that I need to write for a group, say out in New York. And I know that they are of this particular instrumental makeup, and they asked me for a piece of approximately, say, for example, 12 minutes. Okay, a 12-minute space. Okay, and then instruments. What instruments do you have? And what are the progressions or possible combinations of those instruments as they work throughout the piece? There'll be a section where there's a solo for one, and the others are supporting. Then there's a solo for another with the rest of the, so you get the idea. And eventually you gradually come into you gradually get this kind of, well, sort of a space in your head where you can start filling in the blanks and elaborating out from, that's actually another interesting term, auskomponierung, which is from Schenker, which literally means composing out from small ideas and becoming larger and larger. So, starting with the conclusion, figuring what's going to happen, length, what's going to do. I find this to be very, very, very helpful. And I would recommend the philosophy of composition, reading The Raven several times and then really enjoying it. Oh, by the way, also, The Simpsons have a marvelous rendition of the Raven, which if you don't know, you should go. You can find it online. It's a marvelously wonderful workup of that. You can go read and enjoy as well. And think about that. And how can this kind of thinking of spaces, what's going to happen to the end, how does this work, and what am I going to do through it? This kind of thinking through a space, I think, is a really, 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 really good thing to at least consider and maybe adapt to your own purposes in your creative writing. Anyway, that's it for today. One more time, thank you very much, Professor Fredrickson, or Tom, to this, I think, a very, 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 very important concept that he first told me about. And see what you can see. Give that some thought. And see if that might help you in your creative efforts down the line. All right, I'll talk to you later. Have a good day. Stay cool. Hope all this stuff helps you. Stuff. There's that word again.